The candlelight flickered, casting dancing shadows on the meticulously set table. 10 years. 10 years of marriage, of shared dreams, of what I'd believed was unwavering love. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration, a reaffirmation of our commitment, a quiet evening to mark a milestone. I'd spent hours preparing his favorite meal: roasted lamb with rosemary and garlic, a delicate potato gratin, and a decadent chocolate cake, his absolute weakness. Everything was perfect, except he wasn't here. I glanced at the clock on the wall, its ticking hands mocking my growing anxiety. 8 p.m. He was supposed to be home hours ago. I'd called his office, his cell phone, the whole phone, even his assistant. No answer. He's probably just stuck in a meeting, Viv, I told myself, trying to push down the rising tide of unease. He'll be here. He wouldn't forget. But a tiny voice, a whisper of doubt, started to creep into my mind. Elliot had been distant lately, preoccupied, working late more and more often. He'd dismissed my concerns, attributing it to the pressures of the impending merger at his law firm. I'd wanted to believe him, needed to believe him, and I paced the living room, my footsteps echoing in the unnaturally quiet mansion. Our mansion. The one we'd bought together, the one I'd poured my heart and soul into decorating, into making a home. It felt cold now, empty, a hollow shell of the life I thought we were building. 8:30 p.m. Still no Elliot. The food was getting cold, the candles were burning low, and the knot in my stomach was tightening with each passing minute. I tried to distract myself, straightening the already perfect place settings, adjusting the already perfect floral arrangement, anything to keep my hands busy, to keep my mind from spiraling. 9 p.m. My phone rang, a shrill, jarring sound that made me jump. I snatched it up, my heart leaping with a mixture of hope and dread. It wasn't Elliot, it was Sarah, my best friend, her voice hesitant, awkward. Viv, hey, are you okay? I'm fine, I said, forcing a lightness into my voice. Just waiting for Elliot. He's running late. There was a pause, a silence that spoke volumes. Viv, I don't know how to say this, Sarah stammered. I saw Elliot downtown at Le Fleur. Le Fleur, the city's most exclusive, most romantic restaurant. The one we'd talked about going to for our anniversary before Elliot had said he had to work late. My breath caught in my throat. He was working? I asked. The words a desperate plea, a denial of the truth that was already forming in my mind. No, Viv, Sarah said, her voice soft, filled with pity. He wasn't working. He was with someone, a woman, a very young woman. The room tilted, the carefully set table, the flickering candles, the elegant surroundings. It all seemed to fade away, replaced by a roaring in my ears, a crushing weight in my chest, a cold, hard knot of disbelief and pain. Are you sure? I whispered, my voice trembling. I'm so sorry, Viv, Sarah said, her voice choked with emotion. I saw them. They were holding hands, kissing. He looked happy. Happy. He looked happy. With another woman. On our anniversary. The phone slipped from my grasp, clattering onto the floor. I sank to my knees, the carefully constructed facade of my perfect life crumbling around me. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a betrayal. A deliberate, calculated, soul-crushing betrayal. And it had been going on right under my nose. The tears came, hot and stinging, blurring my vision, choking my breath. I wept, not for the lost dinner, not for the wasted effort, but for the shattered illusion, for the broken trust, for the death of the life I thought I had, for the death of us. He wasn't coming home. He finally strolled in at close to midnight, reeking of expensive perfume and a guilt that he didn't even try to hide very well. He didn't offer any excuses, any apologies, any explanations. He just stood there in the doorway, looking at me with a mixture of annoyance and pity. Vivian, he said, his voice flat, devoid of any emotion. We need to talk. I stared at him, my tears dried, my grief replaced by a cold, hard knot of fury. Talk? I repeated, my voice a low, trembling whisper. You have the audacity to stand there and tell me we need to talk? He walked into the living room, ignoring my outburst, and poured himself a drink. His movements casual, almost arrogant. Sarah called you, I assume? He said, not even bothering to look at me. She saw you, Elliot, I said, my voice rising. With her. At La Fleur, on our anniversary. He sighed, taking a long sip of his drink. Vivian, be reasonable, he said, his voice condescending, as if he were speaking to a child. These things happen. We've grown apart. It's no one's fault. Grown apart? I shrieked, my voice cracking with disbelief. We're married, Elliot. We made vows. We built a life together. You don't just grow apart and end up in bed with another woman. He finally turned to face me, his expression cold, his eyes devoid of any warmth, any affection. You wouldn't understand, Viv, he said, his voice dripping with a patronizing tone that made my blood boil. You've never understood the pressures I'm under, the demands of my career. You've always been content with the simple things, but I need more. More? I repeated, my voice trembling with rage. More than what? More than my love? More than my loyalty? More than the life we built together? You were always more of a partner than a wife, Viv, he said, his words like daggers to my heart. A support system. A convenience. But this is different. This is... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The implication was clear. This other woman, this younger, more exciting woman, was what he really wanted. I was just in the way. You should be grateful for the life I've given you, Viv, he continued, his voice taking on a harder edge. The house, the car, the comfort. You wouldn't have any of that without me. His words were a slap in the face, a final, crushing blow to my already shattered heart. He was reducing our 10 years together, our love, our marriage to a transaction, a business arrangement. And I was the losing party. Something inside me snapped. The grief, the pain, the humiliation, it all coalesced into a cold, hard resolve, a burning desire for something. Get out, I said, my voice surprisingly calm, almost devoid of emotion. He looked at me, surprised. He'd expected tears, pleading, begging. He hadn't expected this. What? He asked, his voice laced with disbelief. Get out, I repeated, my voice firmer this time. Pack your things and get out. I don't ever want to see you again. He scoffed, a dismissive, arrogant sound. Don't be ridiculous, Viv. Where will you go? What will you do? You're nothing without me. He truly believed that. He believed I was helpless, dependent, incapable of surviving without him. He saw me as a weak, submissive wife, a shadow in his life. He had no idea how wrong he was. I walked to the bedroom, grabbed a suitcase, and started throwing my clothes into it. I didn't pack much, just the essentials. I didn't need anything from this house, anything from this life. I was leaving it all behind. He watched me, his expression shifting from amusement to concern. He was starting to realize that I was serious, that I wasn't going to beg, that I wasn't going to forgive. Vivian, stop this, he said, his voice losing its confident edge. We can work this out. We can go to counseling. Counseling? I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. There's nothing to counsel, Elliot. It's over. We're over. I zipped up the suitcase, my hand steady, my resolve unwavering. I walked past him, towards the door, not even looking at him. You'll be back, he said, his voice a desperate plea. You'll realize you can't live without me. You'll come crawling back. I stopped at the doorway, turning to face him, my eyes filled with a cold, hard determination he'd never seen before. No, Elliot, I said, my voice a chilling whisper. I won't. You made your choice. And now, you'll live with the consequences. And with that, I walked out, leaving him standing there, alone, in the ruins of the life he had destroyed. He thought I was nothing. He thought I was weak. He thought he'd won. He was about to learn how very, very wrong he was. The motel room was a stark contrast to the opulent mansion I'd just left. Dingy wallpaper, stained carpet, a flickering neon sign outside the window casting a lurid glow on the threadbare curtains. It was depressing and utterly, liberating. I sat on the edge of the lumpy bed, clutching my suitcase, my heart pounding, my mind racing. I was alone, truly alone. I had no money, no job, no home, just a suitcase full of clothes and a burning desire for something. I called Sarah, my best friend, the only person I could truly trust. Her voice on the other end of the line was a lifeline, a beacon of warmth in the cold, dark emptiness of my new reality. Viv, oh my God, are you okay? What happened? She asked, her voice filled with concern. I told her everything, the betrayal, the confrontation, the walkout. I poured out my heart, my grief, my anger, my everything. That bastard, Sarah hissed, her voice filled with righteous fury. I always knew there was something off about him. I'm so sorry, Viv. So sorry. It's not your fault, Sarah, I said, my voice trembling. I was just blind. I didn't want to see it. What are you going to do? She asked. Where are you? I told her about the motel, about my lack of, well, everything. Stay there, she said firmly. I'm coming to get you. You're staying with me. Sarah's apartment was small, but it was a haven, a safe space where I could start to pick up the pieces of my shattered life. She didn't judge me, didn't pity me, didn't try to offer empty platitudes. She just listened, and that was exactly what I needed. He thinks I'm nothing without him, I said one evening as we sat on her sofa, sharing a bottle of cheap wine. He thinks I'll come crawling back. Sarah snorted. He's an idiot, Viv. You're the strongest, most capable woman I know. You'll show him. You'll show them all. Her words were a spark, igniting a fire within me, a fire of determination, of resilience, of revenge. I wouldn't be a victim. I wouldn't wallow in self-pity. I wouldn't let Elliot define me, destroy me, break me. I would rebuild. I would rise from the ashes. I would become someone new, someone stronger, someone unstoppable. I'm going to make him pay, Sarah, I said, my voice low and steady. I'm going to make him regret the day he ever met me. It wasn't just about the money, the house, the life he'd stolen. It was about the betrayal, the humiliation, the years of emotional abuse I'd endured, the constant belittling, the slow, steady erosion of my self-worth. I wouldn't just get even. I would surpass him. I would become everything he'd ever wanted to be, everything he'd ever feared. I would become his worst nightmare. And he wouldn't even see me coming. That was my vow, my promise, my new beginning, the start of my new life. The first few weeks were a blur of rejection, disappointment, and a healthy dose of humiliation. Armed with nothing but a decade-old resume and a heart full of bruised hope, I started the daunting task of finding a job, any job. The reality of my situation hit me hard. I'd been living in a bubble, a gilded cage of Elliot's making. I hadn't worked in 10 years, not since I'd given up my fledgling career as a marketing consultant to become Mrs. Elliot Hale, the perfect corporate wife. My skills were rusty, my contacts were outdated, and my confidence was shattered. We're looking for someone with more recent experience, one interviewer said, his eyes skimming over my resume with a thinly veiled disdain. Your portfolio is impressive for its time, another said, her tone polite but dismissive. But the industry has changed so much. We'll keep your resume on file, was the standard, polite brush-off. Each rejection chipped away at my fragile resolve, reminding me of how much I'd lost, how far I'd fallen. I was starting from scratch, competing with fresh-faced graduates, hungry young professionals who hadn't sacrificed their careers for a man who'd tossed them aside like a used tissue. One evening, I was sitting on Sarah's sofa, surrounded by crumpled job applications and takeout containers, feeling utterly defeated. I don't know if I can do this, Sarah, I said, my voice choked with despair. I'm out of my depth. I'm too old. I'm irrelevant. Sarah looked at me, her eyes filled with a fierce determination. Don't you dare say that, Viv, she said firmly. You are not irrelevant. You are talented, you are smart, and you are a damn survivor. You just need to remember who you are. Her words struck a chord. Who was I? Beyond the polished veneer of Mrs. Elliot Hale, beyond the carefully constructed facade of the perfect wife, who was Vivian? And then it hit me, I remembered. Before Elliot, before the mansion, Before the social obligations and the endless charade, I had been Vivian Hale, the marketing whiz. I'd had a knack for crafting compelling campaigns, for understanding consumer psychology, for building brands from the ground up. I'd loved it. I'd been good at it. I'd given it all up for Elliot, for his career, for his ambitions. I'd suppressed my own dreams, my own talents to fit into the mold he'd created for me. But now I had nothing to lose. I spent the next few days holed up in Sarah's spare bedroom, transforming myself back into the woman I was. I dusted off my old portfolio, painstakingly updating it with hypothetical projects, showcasing the skills I'd let atrophy for so long. I revamped my resume, highlighting my strengths, downplaying the 10-year gap, framing it as a sabbatical for personal development. A lie, of course, but a necessary one. I scoured job boards, LinkedIn, industry websites, searching for any opportunity that remotely matched my skills. I sent out dozens of applications, each one a carefully crafted plea, a testament to my renewed determination. The rejections still came, but they stung less now. I had a purpose, a goal, a flicker of hope to keep me going. And then, finally, a breakthrough. A small but dynamic marketing agency called Innovate responded to my application. They were looking for a junior marketing consultant, an entry-level position, a far cry from the life I'd once led. But it was a start. The interview was nerve-wracking, but I channeled my inner Vivian Hale, the confident, capable woman I used to be. I spoke passionately about my skills, my experience, embellishing slightly, of course, my vision for their company, and somehow, against all odds, I got the job. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't prestigious, but it was mine. It was a chance to rebuild, to prove myself, to reclaim my life, and I was going to seize it with both hands. Innovate was a whirlwind of activity, a chaotic, creative energy that was both exhilarating and terrifying. I was the oldest person in the office by at least a decade, surrounded by young, ambitious, tech-savvy millennials who spoke a language I barely understood. But I was a fast learner. I threw myself into the work, immersing myself in the latest marketing trends, devouring industry publications, absorbing everything I could like a sponge. I worked long hours, staying late, coming in early, determined to prove my worth, to exceed expectations, to make myself indispensable. I rediscovered my passion, my drive, my innate talent for crafting compelling narratives, for connecting with consumers, for building brands. It was like waking up from a long sleep, rediscovering a part of myself that I'd thought was lost forever. But it wasn't just about the work. It was about the game. The corporate game. The subtle power struggles. The unspoken rules. The strategic alliances. I'd learned a lot about that game from Elliot. I'd watched him for years navigate the treacherous waters of the legal world, charming his clients, outmaneuvering his rivals, building his empire on a foundation of ambition and ruthlessness. I'd always been a keen observer, a silent witness to his machinations. I'd absorbed his strategies, his tactics, his mindset. And now, I was going to use that knowledge to my advantage. I started to network, building relationships with my colleagues, with clients, even with competitors. I was charming, engaging, intelligent, subtly playing the game, building my own network of influence. I listened more than I spoke, observing the dynamics of the office, identifying the key players, the power brokers, the potential allies, and the potential enemies. I learned about their strengths, their weaknesses, their ambitions, their secrets. I was gathering intelligence, building a mental map of the corporate landscape. And then, one afternoon, I overheard a conversation that changed everything. Two of my colleagues were discussing Elliot's firm, Hale and Partners. They were talking about a major client, a tech giant called Cyberdyne, that was considering switching firms. "I hear Hale and Partners is in trouble," one of them said, his voice low. "They've lost a few big cases lately, and Elliot Hale, he's not the man he used to be." "Heard he's got personal problems," the other replied. "Messy divorce, a mistress, the whole 9 yards. Cyberdyne is getting nervous. They're looking for a more stable partner." A spark ignited within me, a spark of revenge. Elliot was vulnerable, his firm was struggling, his reputation was tarnished. And I, Vivian Hale, the woman he'd dismissed as a mere convenience, was in a position to exploit his weakness, to strike back. It was a dangerous game, a risky gamble. But I was ready to play. I had nothing to lose and everything to gain. My quest for information became an obsession. I needed to know everything about Elliot's current situation, his vulnerabilities, his weaknesses, his secrets. I was no longer just building my own career. I was meticulously planning his downfall. I used my new network, my growing contacts in the industry to gather intelligence. I leveraged my charm, my intelligence, my carefully cultivated air of innocence to extract information from unsuspecting sources. I learned that Hale and Partners was hemorrhaging money. Elliot had made a series of disastrous investments, fueled by his arrogance and his increasingly erratic behavior. He'd alienated key clients, burned bridges with former allies, and created a toxic work environment that was driving away his best employees. His firm was on the verge of collapse, teetering on the precipice of financial ruin. I delved deeper, using my access to industry databases, public records, and even, with Sarah's reluctant help, a bit of discreet social media stalking. I discovered that Elliot's mistress, the younger woman who had been the catalyst for our divorce, was not what she seemed. Her name was Tiffany, and she was a social climber, a gold digger, a woman with a history of attaching herself to wealthy, powerful men, only to discard them when their fortunes turned. Tiffany, I learned, was already growing bored with Elliot's dwindling resources. She was making inquiries, subtly, discreetly, searching for her next target, her next meal ticket. And then, there were Elliot's enemies. He'd made plenty of them over the years. Lawyers he'd humiliated in court, business rivals he'd crushed, former partners he'd betrayed. They were a powerful, influential group, and they were all watching Elliot's downfall with a mixture of schadenfreude and anticipation. I realized that I wasn't alone in wanting to see Elliot fail. He'd created a vast network of resentment, of anger, of people who were just waiting for the opportunity to strike back. I had the knowledge, I had the motivation, I had the network, and all I needed was a plan. A plan to bring down Elliot Hale once and for all, and I was starting to see exactly how to do it. It was a dangerous game, a high-stakes gamble. But I was ready to play. I had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. It was time for Elliot to reap what he had sown. My plan was intricate, delicate, like a spiderweb spun from threads of information and opportunity. I couldn't just charge in, guns blazing. That was Elliot's style, crude and obvious. I needed to be subtle, strategic, invisible. A ghost in the machine, dismantling his empire piece by piece. My position at Innovate, though junior, gave me access to a surprising amount of information. I was privy to industry gossip, client movements, and, most importantly, the vulnerabilities of our competitors. And Hale and Partners was now officially a competitor. I started small, a whispered suggestion to a colleague about a potential conflict of interest in one of Elliot's smaller deals. An anonymous tip to a financial blogger about some questionable accounting practices at Hale and Partners. A casual mention to a potential client about Elliot's recent instability. These were tiny ripples, barely noticeable, but they were creating waves. Waves that were starting to erode the foundations of Elliot's already shaky empire. The next step was more direct, more risky. I needed to hit him where it hurt, his finances. Using a shell corporation, a carefully constructed legal entity designed to conceal my identity, I started buying shares of Hale and Partners. Not enough to trigger any alarms, not enough to attract attention, but enough to give me a foothold, a seat at the table, a voice in the future of the company. It was a gamble, a significant investment of my meager savings, but I was confident. I knew from my research that Hale and Partners was on the brink. One major blow, one significant loss, could send the whole thing tumbling down, and I was about to deliver that blow. Cyberdyne, the tech giant, Elliot's biggest, most important client, the one he'd been desperately courting, the one he needed to keep his firm afloat. I knew from my sources at Innovate that Cyberdyne was wavering. They were concerned about Elliot's recent erratic behavior, his firm's declining performance, the whispers of scandal surrounding him. I needed to give them a push, a gentle, almost imperceptible nudge in the right direction. I arranged a meeting with a senior executive at Cyberdyne, someone I'd cultivated through my networking efforts. I presented myself as a concerned industry insider, a well-wisher, someone who simply wanted to offer a friendly warning. I've heard some troubling things about Hale and Partners, I said, my voice casual, my expression carefully neutral. Off the record, of course, I wouldn't want to be seen as spreading rumors. I proceeded to accidentally reveal a carefully selected piece of information, a damaging detail about Elliot's handling of a recent case, a hint of financial impropriety, a whisper of instability. I didn't outright accuse him of anything. I simply planted the seeds of doubt, of concern, of distrust. I just thought you should know, I said, concluding our meeting with a practiced smile. You know, for your own due diligence. The executive thanked me, his expression thoughtful, his mind already racing. I left the meeting, my heart pounding, my hands trembling. I'd played my card, now all I could do was wait. The news came a few days later. Cyberdyne had terminated their contract with Hale and Partners. They'd issued a press release citing concerns about the firm's long-term stability. It was a devastating blow, a major loss of revenue, a crippling blow to Elliot's reputation, a signal to other clients that Hale and Partners was a sinking ship. I monitored Elliot's reaction through the industry grapevine, through the whispers and rumors that circulated like wildfire through the corporate world. He was furious, of course. He was ranting, raving, blaming everyone but himself. He was firing employees, threatening lawsuits, desperately trying to contain the damage. He was also becoming increasingly paranoid. He knew he was under attack, but he didn't know from where. He was looking for enemies everywhere, suspecting his rivals, his former partners, even his own employees. He had no idea that the architect of his downfall was the woman he'd dismissed as a convenience, the woman he'd betrayed, humiliated, and discarded. He had no idea that I was just getting started. With Elliot's professional life crumbling, I turned my attention to his personal life. Specifically to Tiffany, the mistress, the younger woman, who had been the catalyst for my own liberation. I didn't want to hurt her, not physically. That wasn't my style. But I did want to expose her, to reveal her true nature, to show Elliot the kind of woman he'd chosen over me. I'd learned through my research that Tiffany was a master manipulator, a social climber who preyed on wealthy, vulnerable men. She had a history, a pattern of behavior that was remarkably consistent. I needed to make sure she knew that Elliot's wealth, his power, his status, it was all an illusion, a house of cards that was about to come crashing down. I arranged a meeting again using an alias. This time, I posed as a headhunter, representing a wealthy, influential client who was looking for a companion. Tiffany, predictably, was intrigued. She arrived at the meeting, dressed to impress, her eyes sparkling with ambition and greed. I played my part perfectly, dangling the carrot of a lavish lifestyle, a generous allowance, a connection to a man of immense power and wealth. She was hooked. She was practically salivating at the prospect. And then I dropped the bomb. I casually mentioned Elliot's name, his firm's troubles, his impending financial ruin. I showed her news articles, financial reports, even a copy of the Cyberdyne termination letter, obtained, of course, through my anonymous sources. Her face changed, the carefully constructed facade of charm and sophistication crumbling before my eyes. The greed, the ambition, was replaced by fear. And then disgust. I had no idea, she stammered, her voice losing its confident edge. He told me everything was fine. He lied, I said, my voice cold and hard. He's a sinking ship, Tiffany, and you don't want to go down with him. She didn't argue. She didn't defend him. She simply fled. I watched her go, a feeling of cold satisfaction washing over me. It wasn't a victory, not yet. But it was another domino falling, another piece of Elliot's carefully constructed world crumbling to dust. I knew from my sources that Tiffany had left him. She'd packed her bags, emptied his apartment of her belongings, and vanished without a word, without a trace. Elliot was now completely alone. His business was failing, his reputation was ruined, his mistress had abandoned him. He was a broken man, stripped of everything he valued, everything he'd believed made him who he was. And I Vivian Hale, the woman he'd underestimated, the woman he'd discarded, was the one who had orchestrated his downfall. It was a sweet, satisfying feeling, but it wasn't enough, not yet. The final act was yet to come. The time had come for the final act, the coup de grace, the moment when I would reveal myself to Elliot and claim my victory. I'd spent months, years, meticulously planning this, orchestrating every detail, anticipating every move. Now it was time to execute. My shell corporation, Phoenix Investments, a name I'd chosen with deliberate irony, had been quietly acquiring shares of Hale and Partners. I'd used my knowledge of the market, my inside information, and yes, a bit of subtle manipulation to buy low, to accumulate power, to become the majority shareholder. Elliot, of course, had no idea. He was too busy scrambling to save his sinking ship, too consumed by his own paranoia and desperation, to notice the silent predator circling him. I called a board meeting. It was a formality, really. I already controlled the majority of the shares. I held all the cards. But I wanted to do this in person. I wanted to see the look on Elliot's face when he realized that I was the one who had orchestrated his downfall. The boardroom of Hale and Partners was a familiar setting, a place where I'd spent countless hours years ago supporting Elliot, advising him, helping him build his empire. Now, I was here to dismantle it. The board members were assembled, their faces a mixture of anxiety, confusion, and thinly veiled hostility. They knew the firm was in trouble, but they didn't know the full extent of the damage. They didn't know who I was. Elliot walked in, late, as usual, his expression a mixture of arrogance and desperation. He still thought he was in control, that he could somehow salvage the situation. He was wrong. "Let's get this over with," he said, his voice dismissive, his eyes scanning the room. He didn't recognize me, of course. Why would he? I was a ghost, a phantom from his past. I stood up slowly, deliberately, letting the silence build, letting the tension in the room escalate. "Good morning, gentlemen," I said, my voice calm, controlled, authoritative. "My name is Victoria Thorne, and I am the new majority shareholder of Hale and Partners." A collective gasp filled the room. Elliot's face went white, his eyes widening in disbelief. What is this?" he stammered. "Who are you? What are you talking about?" I smiled, a cold, mirthless smile. "I'm the one who bought your company, Elliot," I said, my voice dripping with satisfaction. "I'm the one who's been pulling the strings, orchestrating your downfall. I'm the one who's going to take everything from you." I presented the evidence, the documents, the financial records, the leaked emails, the insider information. Everything I'd accumulated over the past few years. I laid it all out piece by piece, exposing Elliot's mismanagement, his corruption, his lies. The board members listened in stunned silence, their faces growing increasingly pale, their eyes filled with a mixture of shock and horror. This is outrageous," Elliot shouted, his voice desperate, his composure crumbling. "You can't do this. I built this company. It's mine." "You built your empire on my back, Elliot," I said, my voice a low, chilling whisper. "You used me. You betrayed me. You discarded me. And now, I own it." I turned to the board members, my gaze sweeping over their faces. "I propose a vote," I said. "A vote to remove Elliot Hale as CEO of Hale and Partners, effective immediately." The vote was unanimous. Elliot was stripped of his power, his position, his legacy. He was finished. He stared at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of rage, disbelief, and fear. He finally understood. He finally recognized me. "Vivian?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. I didn't reply. I simply smiled, a cold, triumphant smile, and walked out of the boardroom, leaving him there alone, surrounded by the wreckage of his life. He tried to come after me, to beg, to plead, to threaten. But the security guards, my security guards now, blocked his path. "Get out, Mr. Hale," one of them said, his voice firm. "You're no longer welcome here." And that was it. It was over. My revenge was complete. I'd taken everything from him, his company, his reputation, his future. He was nothing. A broken, disgraced, forgotten man, and I was victorious. But the victory felt hollow, empty. The thrill of revenge had faded, leaving behind a lingering sadness, a sense of loss, a recognition of the darkness I'd embraced to achieve my goals. I'd won. But at what cost? Elliot was a ghost of his former self, a cautionary tale whispered in the corridors of power. He tried to fight back, of course. He launched lawsuits, made accusations, attempted to smear my reputation. But it was useless. I'd covered my tracks too well, anticipated his every move. He reached out to old friends, former colleagues, seeking help, support, a lifeline. But no one answered his calls. He was alone, isolated, a pariah in the world he'd once dominated. He even tried to contact me, sending desperate emails, leaving rambling voicemails, begging for forgiveness, for another chance. I ignored him. He was nothing to me now, a memory, a shadow, a reminder of a past I'd left behind. His attempts to find another job, to rebuild his career, were futile. His reputation preceded him. No one wanted to be associated with the disgraced former CEO of Hale and Partners. He was toxic, untouchable, a walking symbol of failure. He ended up nowhere. A broken man living in a cheap apartment, his dreams shattered, his future bleak. He'd lost everything, just as I'd planned, just as he deserved. I moved on, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. I'd achieved my revenge, but I didn't want to be defined by it. I didn't want to be consumed by the darkness. I sold Hale and Partners, divesting myself of any connection to Elliot, to my past. I used the money to expand the Phoenix Foundation, to support causes I believed in, to make a positive impact on the world. I was Vivian Hale no more. I wasn't even entirely Victoria Thorne. I was someone new, someone stronger, more resilient, more powerful, but I was also haunted by the memories, by the guilt, by the knowledge of what I'd done. I'd become a master manipulator, a liar, a deceiver. I'd used my intelligence, my cunning, my power to destroy another human being. Was it justified? Yes. Did I regret it? No. But did it change me? Absolutely. I'd learned a harsh lesson about the nature of revenge, about the seductive allure of power, about the corrosive effects of betrayal. I'd learned that even the most righteous anger, the most justified vengeance, could leave a stain on your soul, and the ending was quiet. A sense of peace, perhaps, but also a lingering sadness, a recognition that I could never fully escape the shadows of my past. I was standing on a rooftop terrace overlooking the city, the lights twinkling below like a vast, shimmering ocean. It was a beautiful view, a symbol of my success, my triumph, my rebirth. But I was alone, and I knew, deep down, that I would always be alone in a way. I'd built walls around my heart, impenetrable barriers of secrecy and control. I could never fully trust anyone, never fully reveal myself, never fully escape the fear of being exposed, of being betrayed again. I was Vivian, and yet I was a stranger even to myself. A woman reborn, yes, but also a woman forever marked by the darkness she had embraced. But I wouldn't be a victim. I would never be powerless again. I had learned the rules of the game, and I would play it to win, always. I was ready for anything, and I was determined to do better. This was my second chance, and I wasn't about to let it slip.